Some say nothing feels like the open road. The fun and freedom one can experience could be equal parts calming and exhilarating, but how do you capture that essence in a theme park ride? Disney's answer in the 80s was to teach their guests the history of travel, and at the turn of the century, they wanted to put riders through the many trials vehicles go through in order to be road ready. So, which approach was the superior one? We'll discuss that and more in this episode. Welcome back to another installment of Disney Versus. Today we'll look at the former Future World destinations in World of Motion and Test Track. Like many early Epcot rides, World of Motion was a slow-moving 15-minute experience, filled to the brim with catchy music and silly animatronics. Once Disney got rid of all their classics, they turned to a semi-thrill ride in Test Track. From making you a crash test dummy to building your own vehicle, I'd be lying to say that the new concept wasn't at least very interesting. So which one of these attractions will come out on top? But before we get started, I just want to let you know that I have a Patreon with a link in the description. So if you enjoy my videos and like to support my channel, consider joining. But without further ado, let's look at the history of World of Motion. We've mentioned in several other videos that the vision of a lot of early Epcot attractions came from the 1964 World's Fair. Ford's Magic Skyway was the genesis of the Omni Mover ride system, which in its simplest terms was just a conveyor belt with seats to drag riders through different scenes in the ride. It was groundbreaking for moving large numbers of people in and out of attractions, while cutting down on wait times. Well, mostly. Ford's Magic Skyway spawned many early Epcot rides such as Spaceship Earth, Universe of Energy, and of course, World of Motion. The ride was designed by legendary animator Ward Kimball. This was the first and only attraction he ever worked on. For those of us who were lucky enough to ride this attraction could see his sense of humor on full display. The ride itself, funnily enough, started outside, as the Omni Mover would bring you from the loading area and wrap around from outside the show building right into the first scene. In this scene, you'll see people crossing a vast desert on various animals. The long trek shows that humans will need to rely on something else other than our four-legged friends for transportation. Next, we see a competition for who can make the best wheel. We see many shapes on display, but the Sultan decides that the circle will work best for crossing long distances, for obvious reasons. Guests then enter what looks like either Rome or Egypt, while people are showing off their chariots made with their brand new wheel, followed by one of the ride's most iconic scenes, the sea serpent looking through the looking glass. Out of all the 188 animatronics used for this attraction, I feel this one is the one people remember the most. Riders then get to witness the painting of the Mona Lisa along with the original Flight of Passage, Da Vinci mocking up the first concept for human flight. All this innovation doesn't come without its downfall. With the evolution into automobiles, unfortunately comes the world's first traffic jam. Transportation also gives rise to outlaws who try to take over trains and terrorize its patrons. But it's not all bad. With the wheel, it can be personalized into a bicycle, making local travel fun and easy. Now that the roads have been built and more Americans could travel, the tradition is the new Sunday drive, where you could take a ride up to the countryside to get away from it all. And here we see Da Vinci's dream become a reality as planes have conquered the skies, a feat never thought possible just a few years prior. And finally is a futuristic city that is projected onto a giant screen, similar to the last scene in Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger Spin. The ride would empty out into a post-show where you could sit in the newest cars that General Motors had to offer, as well as unreleased concept cars. In 1992, Disney's contract with General Motors was up. Instead of signing a multi-year agreement, they would commit to a series of one-year deals due to GM's poor sales. And on January 2nd of 1996, World of Motion would close, breaking the hearts of many who loved this attraction. March 17th, 1999. While a soft opening did occur in December of 98, the original Test Track had many hurdles to overcome. The first issue was the wheels used in the first ride cars couldn't hold up to the speed of the ride. The more glaring issue was the ride capacity. To get an acceptable number of guests through the attraction, Test Track needed about 29 cars. The system they had in place could only manage 6. so essentially the ride took about 3 years to complete to get all the bugs worked out for this attraction to be road ready. The first part of the original queue was a combination welcome center and repair shop, where guests could see different tests car parts would go through. The second part of this queue was a briefing by John Michael Higgins. He would tell the riders they would take part in the testing of the cars with videos showing what each test would entail. After exiting the pre-show area, guests are finally loaded into their cars. Riders go up a slight incline to reach the suspension test where you ride over cobblestone blocks. Next up is the anti-lock braking test. You do one test with the brakes on, then one test with the brakes off, to show the difference and importance that anti-lock braking can make, sacrificing some traffic cones in the process. Third test is the environment chambers, one for heat where the room had 192 heating lamps, a chamber for cold, and a chamber for corrosion. Guests would then enter the handling test. Your car would go up a series of hills with a blind turn on top, where at the end you'd have to swerve out of the way of a semi-truck. The final test was hitting an outdoor track where the ride vehicle would hit a top speed of 95 miles per hour. The course would take you to the backside of the show building where you could see the employee parking lot. The post-show was changed to what Imagineer Bob Rogers called the Assembly Experience. It was a walkthrough environment where you were given the illusion of walking through a vast assembly plant. On January 6th of 2012, it was announced that Test Track would close for a makeover, and in just under a year, we would get the next iteration of this attraction. December 6th, 2012. Chevrolet would get their name on the marquee instead of GM as a whole. Instead of an industrial theming, this version would be more of a futuristic Tron theme. The queue was given a makeover with concept cars and art. The second part of the queue would give riders a few minutes to design their own car and see how they would stack up with other riders in the same car throughout various tests. The first trial is the capability test featuring OnStar. This is to see how your vehicle performs in various weather conditions such as rain and snow. Your car will skid out of control to also see how it handles sharp turns in the weather. Next is the efficiency test to see how eco-friendly your car is, as well as testing to see how aerodynamic your design was. Up third is the responsiveness test. This is a series of hairpin turns along with avoiding an 18-wheeler at the end of the course, very similar to the previous version. And just like the previous version, the last test is the power trial. This is to test your car's top speed. Unlike version 1, your ride vehicle tops out at 95 miles per hour rather than 95. The reduced speed is for safety reasons. The post-show was changed back to a car room show style, just like World of Motion, a change I'm glad to see return. On June 17th of 2024, this ride was closed yet again for another overhaul. This time it's supposed to be a World of Motion overlay. It's set to reopen in 2025, and I'm happy to see old Epcot return in some form. As for World of Motion, I feel this is one of the most underrated attractions ever made. Overshadowed by Horizon, Spaceship Earth, and the original Journey into Imagination, the ride had everything else those other attractions did, just minus the cult fanbase. Even in my family, they never called this ride by its real name. They just used to say, "Hey, let's go on the General Motors ride." I believe I mentioned this in a short a few months back, but a friend of mine went to Disney when they were 5 and didn't remember anything else about the trip except the sea serpent scene. The comedic imagery and theme music gave this attraction a different feel than other 80s dark rides, but the fact that that scene stood out over everything else in Disney, I believe says a lot. The post-show with the newer model GM cars was something I look forward to on every trip. I'm sure there's a photo album somewhere of me sitting in every car from the 80s and the 90s. I never got a chance to ride the original version of Test Track, but after watching the videos, it seems like a cool concept. There are definitely some scenes I wish I got to experience, like the hot and cold rooms, and from the comments I've read, it seemed like that was a fan favorite. For Test Track's second version, I have to say I did enjoy that ride quite a bit. Designing your own car and seeing how it performs during various tests is a really fun idea. The only drawback is it made the line move extremely slow. So after a while, I found myself just waiting on the single rider line just to avoid the wait. I'm glad they brought back the car show post show, even though I didn't spend as much time as I did when I was a kid. This one honestly was almost too close to call. On one hand, World of Motion is one of my favorite rides of all time. Harkening back to the golden age of Imagineering, this 15-minute dark ride was classic Epcot to the core. The flip side is that maybe it was a little bit too similar to other attractions in the same park. While I still don't think it gets the recognition it deserves, I could see why it wasn't as popular as some of its peers. For Test Track, I do kind of feel like they shoehorned a thrill ride into Epcot just to say that they had one. Disney did give Test Track a pretty creative flair, and even though it was an enjoyable ride, I feel the current ride durations make the ride just fly by. I can't believe I'm gonna say this, but I'm gonna give the win to Test Track. As much as I love World of Motion, it didn't separate itself and at times felt like a continuation of Spaceship Earth. I could remember forgetting which scene belonged to which ride, but for Test Track, it gave a new spin for thrill rides, and the interactivity and competition it created definitely gave this ride some rewritability. This was not a blowout by any means, and World of Motion is still one of my favorites. But I feel my sensibilities are a little too old school and have to admit that Test Track had a broader appeal. But I'm more than happy to see what version 3 of Test Track will look like with the World of Motion overlay. So anyway, let me know what attraction you think won and make sure to be on the lookout for our next Disney Versus where we go soaring around the kitchen. So until next time, drop a like if you enjoyed this, subscribe if I earned it, join the Patreon only if you can, and thank you for watching.